I feel like I look like a mean girl with my hair straightened like this. Today's video review is a little late and I apologize for that. Airplane, can we not? Today's video is a review of A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Tahereh Mafi. Spoiler alert, I read this as an ARC, so I have the book on my phone, and on my phone all the text is highlighted, but I don't have a physical copy all marked up. So I reread chapter 1 and I intend to do a full reread of this soon. But this is Tahereh Mafi's newest book that just came out on October 16th. If you're not familiar with Tahereh Mafi, she has written my favorite series in the entire world, which is called the Shatter Me series. She also has a duology that's middle grade called Furthermore. When I heard she was delving into contemporary, or is this contemporary? It's set in 2002 and I've gotten comments about whether or not it's historical fiction, which, oh my god, no. But regardless, when I found out she was going to write something in this genre, I was very interested, especially because this is an autobiographical novel. I guess that leads us into the synopsis, which is this book follows a young girl named Shireen. Her family moves around a lot, and so the beginning of this book she's settling into a new school, and the main drive of this book is the fact that Shireen is Persian, so she wears a headscarf, and the book takes place post 9/11, so it talks all about how she's having to deal with bigotry and racism from people around her at her school, having to learn to combat those stereotypes and find people who appreciate her. The root of this book is just that Shireen is a very angry young woman who just doesn't think the world around her is fair, and she's not treated as she should be treated, which is obvious. And so the narration of this really reflects that, and it's driven by her not being able to trust people and her just constantly feeling abandoned and betrayed by the world. So other small facets of this plot include the fact that Shireen likes breakdancing, so she and her older brother really get into breakdancing and competitions and watching that and practicing it. And also, while at this school, Shireen has a classmate named Ocean, who she's really infatuated with. Once again, there's the struggle between wanting to trust people but still not quite having that, and so it's very much a relationship of having to overcome a lot of boundaries between race and having to unpack some discussions about how we treat people of races that we're not familiar with, and especially how politics and religion go into wearing a headscarf and the symbolism behind that. That was the longest synopsis ever. But let's get into my thoughts. I gave this book 4.5 stars. First and foremost, I want to disclose that this might not even be a good time for me to be filming a review of this, because I really want to reread this, because I think the first time that I read it, I was going into it with the mindset of, this is Tahereh Mafi, I love her so much, she does this one thing, and I love what she does, and I can't wait to see that. And this book is so different than what she's done before. There's certainly parts of it that I'm not a fan of in general, but I think originally I was too critical of it because it wasn't what I was used to. So I think that this book being able to push those boundaries inside me sparked a lot of great reflection. So in Shatter Me and Furthermore, we are very much used to the flowery writing, the metaphorical writing. Every page is just inundated with imagery, and this book really just cuts that crap. If you're someone who hated Shatter Me or Furthermore just because it was so image heavy, this is so opposite of that. This one really adheres to the mindset of someone that is angry and just venting. It's a very authentic voice. I would say that Shatter Me is stream of consciousness, and this also is sort of stream of consciousness, but in the opposite tone. If Juliet would have been like closed off to the world and hated everyone, this is what she would have sounded like narrating her book. It was a much more blunt writing style where she would be like, this is what this is, this is what this is, this is how I feel about this, literally to the point of just throwing expletives in on page 2. It was so different. And Shireen's personality is just atomic. I love how it reflects with her writing style. So although I was really shocked at first at how the writing seemed to take on this different style, it wasn't that much showing anymore rather than telling. Originally that made me kind of disturbed because I was like, oh, it's weaker. But it's really not. It really fits the story once I think about it. So I've grown to love the writing style, and even though every other line I'm not highlighting all the beautiful metaphors, it's still just as impactful. However, there were still small phrases and parts of the writing that I just wasn't a personal fan of. I don't know if this needed more editing or if it just was stylistic choices that I'm not fond of, but a lot of times she would use vague references to words, and this is like the editor in me jumping out that just wants specificity. But she would always say, if she saw her phone across the room, she would say, that thing. She used the word thing so much. It's such a tiny detail, but the narrator said it a lot, and she would always say the word whatever, just tiny little phrases that took me out of the story because it just sounded like, not like she was trying too hard to sound like a teenager, but wasn't that flowy. This book takes on a much more conversational tone with the reader, but I felt like sometimes that interfered with the ability to be able to flesh out the world. So although it was nice to hear the narrator's voice come through so strongly, at times I felt like it really limited our perspective in the book because we were only ever getting that vague reference to whatever it was that she was dealing with. So sometimes the tone felt more flippant when we're dealing with really important subject matter, but maybe that was just my interpretation of it. I'm trying to stay as objective as possible because I know despite all of my issues with this book, it's still magnificent, and the issues that I take with the writing are so minor that they don't at all interfere with the story occurring. And that's the next thing I want to talk about, is the actual plot of this one. I absolutely adored the progression of the story, getting to know all the characters. So Ocean is introduced as one of Shireen's classmates. The first time they ever meet each other on page, he taps her on the shoulder on accident and she turns around, and her description of him is, I quote, "some dude." So that just goes into the whole idea that sometimes the descriptions are just so vague and they fit within the writing style, but they don't really offer us any context of the situation. So for a lot of the book, we don't really have specific descriptions of characters, which I really crave in storytelling. But beyond that, talking about the relationship with Ocean and Shireen, I thought they were so beautiful. I loved the way this developed. I loved the IHOP scene. I'm gonna smack that airplane out of the sky if it doesn't stop flying. You all know I'm such a sucker for soft boys in books. I think guys who are just soft-spoken and sweet and kind are the best boys. So the fact that Ocean was so understanding and wanting to learn about her and just curious in the most well-meaning way was so pure. Obviously, I can't relate to being a Muslim girl. I don't know what it's like to have to open up to someone from the opposite gender who doesn't understand your culture. I swear to God, this airplane. They were like, WhittyNovels is filming? Time to fly, boys. But somehow I feel like this was a faithful rendition of what that would be like. I guess while we're here, minor tangent, that's also a really big part of the story that I enjoyed, is that even though I haven't experienced anything like this, I've never experienced subjugation to the magnitude that Shireen has, but the way this is written just made me completely sympathize with her. I understood her anger. I understood the reasons why she was so resentful to the people around her. What the heck come after 6? This book just evoked so much understanding within me, and knowing that it's semi-autobiographical just broke my heart. I was like ready with my 2 fists to start like standing up for Muslim girls in Tahereh when she was littler. It just makes you so much more aware of ways that you could fight back against prejudice and stop feeding into stereotypes. That was my tangent. Back to our original topic, Naveed and Shireen's relationship or friendship, siblinghood. Naveed is probably my favorite side character. He is such a personality. He is the brother who gets her interested in breakdancing, and so they're always together breakdancing after school, and all of his friend group is there as well. I think he was the perfect supporting role in this book. I thought their interactions were so cozy and sweet. Altogether, the family vibes in this book, again, just put you into that world of a culture that I've never experienced, but I still felt so heartwarmed by all of it. Is that a verb? Heartwarmed? I felt like I was sitting at the dinner table with them whenever we would read scenes like that, and it was so funny all the time seeing her interactions with her mom, and her brother was just the best supporting role. That's all I can say. I loved him so much. I just was not a fan of the climax of this book. This book has so much priceless commentary on what it's like to be a Muslim teen, what it's like to face racism every day, and yet the conflict of this feels below that. The fact that Shireen is dealing with all of this, whereas Ocean is just concerned about the sports team he's on, I just think the ending was so unoriginal. Don't get me wrong, interracial relationships and broken family life are really important topics to unpack, and I'm not saying that those aren't important or those are unrealistic, but the idea that this massive conflict was just born from the fact that this one kid needed to win a basketball game, it was so High School Musical. I'm not saying that it's a bad plot point, but it's definitely not an original one. So maybe the stakes could have been raised in the end. I obviously don't mean I want for Shireen to go through any heartbreak or like get hurt or anything. The angst level was a little more than I could do, and that might make me sound like a hypocrite because Shatter Me is angst every single page, but maybe when I reread it I'll find less of a problem with it and I'll delete this review and be mad at my past self for thinking that. But just know that if you're not a fan of, I guess, teenage melodrama, even though I'm fear labeling it that because I don't want to minimize that trauma. And if you don't mind that, you'll give this 5 stars. It's amazing. If you know me, I'm not a big fan of YA contemporary, so this is already kind of a stretch for me. That's why I'm justifying every criticism I have of it, because a lot of this is just my interpretation of it, and my opinion of it is just driven by the fact that it's not a genre I delve into that often, and it's not a genre that I typically find immersive. I think it could have had a bigger conflict in the end than just that. That's what I'm trying to say. But as I've said 1,000 times, and I will continue to say 3,000 more times, this book, just this book. Not even the fact that it's from my favorite author and getting to know more about her experiences in high school translated into a fictional account, but also just I've never read anything like this before. This unpacks so much discussion about intersectional feminism and interrelational relationships. It's cute at the same time that it's meaningful. It doesn't get on a soapbox and preach at you, but it's not so subtle that you miss the message. It's just in that sweet spot. It has that iconic Tahereh Mafi characterization, so all the characters just slowly bleed out their personalities. That was a very dismal way to phrase that, but you get this very slow progression of relationships and character dynamics and family. And even though some plot elements in the end were kind of lackluster, like the climax of it felt really melodramatic and the breakdancing ended up being really secondary to the actual plot, which was surprising to me, I'm gonna stop finding more flaws to point out in it and just say you have to pick this up. And I'm totally biased because it's Tahereh Mafi and I want her to do so well and I support her so much and her writing style is so beautiful and I love her so much, but also you're never gonna read anything like this ever again. Even if you don't like YA contemporary, make an exception. But that is everything I have to talk about. My back hurts like a mother trucker right now. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Let me know if you read the book. Bye everyone!